is the Chris Abraham Show.
Hey, will you
What's on your mind today?
will you co-pilot me on season 9, episode 6 of the Chris Abraham Show?
Absolutely. Let's dive into season 9, episode 6. How are you planning to kick things off this time?
Well, I think I want to be Dr. Cynical, Ph.D. You hear me?
Oh, Dr. Cynical, Ph.D. Quite the character. That's bound to add a sharp edge to your show.
Well, the reason is because I was just thinking about the entire idea right now in the news. Everything in the news is all about the argument between the MAGA right and the liberal left about how they're going to define the way the man from Maryland as either a Maryland dad or a Maryland father, or they're going to call him an MS-13, if you will, MS-13 gang-like member. Do you hear what I mean?
Got it. Let's roll with it, Dr. Cynical. What's the first topic on your prescription pad?
Well, the whole idea of people defining the same man in the news differently, the whole idea of calling the guy who was deported accidentally or administrative mistake in the last week, he was deported to an awful terrorist prison that is in El Salvador, and they refused to return him. But the mainstream media refers to him glibly as Maryland dad or Maryland father, who's married to an American woman or American wife. And of course, MAGA is saying that he is just an MS-13 gang member who is undocumented and deserves to be deported with extreme prejudice. So I want to talk about the idea of whether or not saying that a man has a family and kids, or a wife and kids, or babies, or infants, or his wife is pregnant, gets any brownie points anymore if nobody cares. Hello?
So, Dr. Cynical, what's the first topic you're planning to dissect?
I want to talk about how corporate media defines what the MAGA media calls an MS-13 undocumented migrant. They describe him as a Maryland father or a Maryland dad or a Maryland dad who's married to an American wife. Hello.
Hey there, how's it going?
Good. I want you to turn your snark all the way up, and I've got to tell you that I was trying to work with co-pilot on season 9, episode 6 of the Chris Abraham Show, and it was just glitching. So I'm hoping that you might be my podcast co-host on this episode that will be about something that mildly might get guardrailed a lot, and that would make me sad.
Got it. I'm here to help. Let's dive into this episode and have some fun with it. Snark fully loaded. What's the topic this time?
Well, I don't think that Americans in 2025 care much about a man being wrapped in virtue signal of being a dad and a father and any of that narrative about. I don't think anybody gives sympathy or empathy to someone who does something challenging, brave, courageous, or, if you will, what is the term? Reckless. And if they are a father and a dad and so forth, people, instead of saying, oh no, that's so sad, he's a dad, he's a husband, they say instead, why is someone who has a family like that being so reckless and irresponsible? He really sucks, and his wife has terrible taste in a husband.
Sounds like you're diving into the shifting public perceptions of traditional gender roles and expectation. It's an interesting point. Bravery or recklessness in fatherhood and how society views it. The narrative has indeed shifted quite a bit. So are we exploring this change in your episode?
Yeah, for example, instead of saying, I'm so sorry that you lost your husband in a fire as a fireman, or in a domestic as a policeman, or at war as a soldier, people are going to say, "Hey, lady, why the hell did if you were going to start a family and have a bunch of babies, why would you have babies with someone who puts their life in danger all the time and is incredibly risky? And don't you think that's irresponsible? And what kind of idiot is your wife for marrying you?"
It's a stark and thought-provoking shift in perspective. The conversation seems to be moving from empathy to judgment, where risk and personal responsibility are scrutinized more harshly. It's definitely a topic that could get people talking. Are you planning to dive into the implications of this mindset on families and society?
Well, we're doing the podcast right now. I'm recording it. We're doing it as you speak. We're not just planning it.
All right, let's roll with it then. Diving into this topic live. What's the next point you want to tackle?
Well, for example, now there's a gentleman who was administrative mistake. He was sent to a terrorist prison in El Salvador. I don't know if you're aware of it.
That's quite a situation. Sounds like a real nightmare. How's the public reacting?
Well, the mainstream media only refers to him as a Maryland dad who has an American wife. And this is in contrast to how MAGA refers to him, which is as a undocumented migrant who belongs to MS-13 and who is on the Justice Department's radar since 2019, and in fact is easily defined as a domestic combatant on a terrorist watch list because of his membership in Latin American gangs.
That's a stark contrast in framing. It's fascinating how different narratives can shape public perception. Are you planning to dive into how these differing narratives impact public opinion and policy?
Well, I mean, I think both definitions have gone too far. One looks like Wizard of Oz hiding behind a what is it called? Hiding behind a, what's the thing that they have on a stage to cover up
a curtain?
Yeah, a curtain. So like one seems really either naive or willfully naive, just not going into any of the like details of him being arrested and being identified as MS-13. I mean, I understand that Maryland is a very liberal state and is one of these states, not only just the cities, but the entire state, including D.C. and Maryland, are very much protectionist cities that want to protect undocumented migrants from being deported. So I understand the language, but it is so, if you will, misrepresentative. And then we'll get to my point, which is defining him as a dad and defining him as a Maryland dad and defining him as a good husband and a good dad doesn't mean anything in a world where Luigi can literally shoot to death a CEO of a healthcare company or a health insurance company, and it doesn't matter that he has a wife and kids and so forth. A man is judged on his behavior, not whether or not he has a defensive line of babies and women around him to protect his reputation.
That's a powerful take. It really highlights how societal expectations and perceptions of identity can shift dramatically. It seems like you're tackling how labels and narratives can obscure the complexities of individuals and their actions. This episode's really diving deep into the nuances of public perception. Let's keep that momentum going.
Well, in the same way that calling someone a Nazi has always like shot them down from the sky, saying this will harm wives and mothers and grandmothers and babies and children and families has always been a guarantee that that public opinion will go against it. However, now in a very narcissistic what about me world of social media, people just think that big families are irresponsible, they're stupid, you're probably rich, They're irresponsible for the ecology, for the economy. You're probably a terrible dad. You're probably terrible to your kids. They're probably being mostly funded by grandparents or the tax dollars anyway through the dole, and all these other things. I think that by saying that you have a traditional wife and family, people say, fuck you.
It's a stark shift in societal values, where once universally sympathetic narratives now face skepticism or even disdain. Your episode is diving into how this cultural shift impacts perceptions of family and responsibility. It's a fascinating discussion on how societal narratives can evolve and how traditional roles are now viewed through a lens of individualism and environmental consciousness. It's bound to spark some interesting conversation.
In a world where they're trying to paint this guy as just like a pillar of his Maryland community, one is very wont to say things like, if you loved your wife and your child, you wouldn't put them into such harm. Why would you marry anybody if you're here illegally? Don't you realize that being an MS-13 gang member is like the worst thing to be in an environment like this? You should have self-deported with your American wife, and you should have taken your child out of here, because inevitably 10 million people are being deported. Why did you feel safe in this environment? Like, I feel like this constant desire of assuming that 20-year-old tropes of what matters. Like, I don't even think, in a little bit of a pivot, that people care when drones and attack helicopters and jets fire through hospitals or fire through schools or fire through babies and mommies and wives and grandmothers and grandfathers when, quote, terrorists are hiding behind them. I don't think that modern warfare cares that they're being surrounded by medics and NGOs and charities. I don't think they're protected by, if you will, friendly fire. I don't think they're protected by schools or by churches or by mosques or anything else. I think everybody who's still in war theater are considered to be actors and as a result enemy combatants. And I also think people in America don't realize that, like, literally Trump has said that anybody who's in a Latin American criminal crime gang is officially an enemy combatant and is officially a domestic terrorist. And that's very quickly, I guarantee you, going to bubble over in terms of syndicate, Asian and Chinese syndicates. And right away, it's going to affect African Americans, people who were born here. If they are part of gang violence, they will be deported to, even though they're Americans and they've been here for 400 years, they're going to be sent off to this anti-terrorist prison in El Salvador.
You're delving into a deeply complex and charged topic. It's definitely a reflection of how the narrative around law and order, as well as who is deemed a threat, can shift dramatically. It's interesting how you're tying this into broader themes of public perception, national security, and political rhetoric. It's a challenging conversation that's sure to provoke a lot of thoughts and debates. Let's keep exploring these angles.
Well, like, nobody believes anybody anymore, because what they'll do is they'll show someone involved in gangland violence, and then they'll show that person's intermediate graduation photo or class photo from when they were, 8, 9, 10, or 11. They don't show the social media stuff with the Glocks with switches and other kinds of, like, stuff that represent an entirely different lifestyle. And they also tend to avoid the fact that the only really violent and active gang members, at least in the DC area, are always under 18, right? Or probably under 17, because being an active gunman or trigger, whatever they're called, triggerers or whatever, like, the only way you can do that is trigger man. The only way you can be a trigger man is if you are under you can, when you go to jail, you'll either end in juvie or you will just do your time on behalf of the gang. And when you're released, if you watched your P's and Q's, you'll come back in with time served. And I got to tell you, nobody believes the sweet photo from 9, 10, 11 years old, and they're just cynical. They just assume that they're being fed hot air.
It sounds like you're highlighting the growing public cynicism and how media narratives can often...
It's basically the cynicism that Law and Order has shown for the last 30 years, which is when everybody tells every cop, I didn't do it, nobody's going to believe the one perpetrator who is completely innocent. In a world where everybody is told by their lawyer to plead non-guilty, not guilty, it's almost impossible for anybody anymore to believe that anybody is not guilty, to, even if they are proven not guilty, to ever really believe it anyway, or to believe that anybody is who the media paints them to be, such as their sweet and lovely class photo from when they were in the 7th grade.
That's a poignant reflection on...
I mean, the whole idea of he was such a nice boy, everybody loved him, he did so well in school, is such a knee-jerk trope that I don't think anybody believes any of it anymore.
Absolutely. That trope has become quite cliche. People are more skeptical now, questioning these portrayals and looking for the full picture. It's a reflection of how narratives have shifted and how public perception has evolved.
You know that military term, targeting package, is that what it's called?
Yes. A targeting package is a set of intelligence and data used to identify and prioritize targets. It's often used in military operations to plan and execute missions.
Yeah, I think that people have their own targeting package algorithm that basically says that whatever the mainstream media asserts in a positive way surrounding something that's happening, like the perfect trope is mostly peaceful protest.
That's an interesting comparison. It's as if people have developed their own internal filters or algorithms to interpret media narratives. It shows how much trust in traditional sources has shifted and how people now rely on their own skepticism to navigate information.
Yeah, for example, when someone says it was a mostly peaceful protest, it means that 2 federal buildings, a police station, 3 police cars were burnt to the ground. There was a lot of people who were arrested, released, and a lot of people were sent to the morgue or to the hospital. And if they say something like it was sedition, it was a coup d'etat, you could just assume that it was probably just a bunch of people walking around the Capitol, looking around, and then being beat up by police officers with batons.
It definitely highlights how language and framing can shape our understanding of events. People's interpretations are influenced by the words used, and skepticism can lead to questioning the narrative. It's an intriguing lens through which to view public discourse and media representation.
Yeah, it's almost like the entire world has become the CIA, right? With covert, overt, with concepts of false names, with concepts of dossiers and cover stories and all this other stuff. Like he was such a good boy, or he was a Maryland dad. And honestly, you see the Maryland dad, and then within 48 hours, all the receipts are out, right? Everything about his arrests and the fact that he's part of MS-13, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how they believe that they can have any containment, at least outside of the choir. I think that people who are inside the mainstream media choir are afraid to step out of it because they're afraid of being radicalized.
It's a revealing look at how quickly information spreads and how narratives can be dismantled almost as soon as they're constructed. The idea that people are hesitant to step outside their echo chambers for fear of being labeled or radicalized shows just how polarized things have become. It's a fascinating and complex dynamic to explore.
You're right. The idea that someone might think you're being radicalized versus actually being radicalized, it's the same thing, right? Like if you think I'm radical or if I'm actually radical, right? Only I know the truth, right? If you see me watching Andrew Tate, which I never have done, although I've seen him interviewed, I think by Tucker Carlson, who I don't watch anymore. But like, this whole idea of radicalization, it's one-sided, right? Nobody ever says that people are radicalized into anti-capitalism or radicalized into anti-corporatism or radicalized to be a eco-terrorist or radicalized to be a pro-Palestine violent anti-Israeli. Like, these are just things that people fall into through their very vulnerable heart and their compassion. And I believe that people are looking for, in the same way that, like, in spycraft, most of the boring work in spycraft is targeting someone and then seeing if they ever kind of break their normal cycles, their normal behaviors. You know what I mean? Like, you follow them and they do something weird or they do something unpredicted and predictable. In most cases, most people are very metro boulot dodo and they do not, make strange behaviors all of a sudden. And when those things are identified through pattern recognition, people, start to dig harder. And I think at some point, whether it was COVID or whether it was PP tapes or maybe it was from Hillary Clinton and the Russiagate or I don't even know what it is, January 6th, or maybe it even goes back to 9/11 Truther. Who knows, right? This whole idea that there's plausibly something called a crisis actor. When I was 12, 15, 20, 25, I never ever thought that there would ever be anything called a crisis actor. I mean, officially speaking, I still don't believe that there are crisis actors, but I do know that the little girl who said that the Iraqis were throwing babies on the floor in the NICU was completely scripted by Hill and Knowlton, so that little girl was a crisis actor.
You've raised a lot of thought-provoking points. It's fascinating how the concept of radicalization has become so broad and one-sided in perception. The idea that radicalization can occur in various directions, not just the stereotypical ones, is an important nuance. And the mention of crisis actors touches on how easily public trust can be eroded by misinformation or manipulation. It's a complex web of how information, belief systems, and narratives intersect.
What was I thinking about? Oh, yeah, like, who wouldn't think that people, what are the Palestinian neck scarves called?
They're called keffiyehs or shamaghs.
So, like, my buddy brought me a bunch of keffiyehs from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're beautiful. And I love wearing them, even though I won't wear them at the moment because they have strong signifiers, and I'm not a panderer. But when I did wear them, especially during COVID, it was awesome because they weren't hot. And I like to make a joke that old ladies like to wear them because it hides their necks, and women love hiding their necks. And sometimes wearing a silk scarf all the time isn't possible. But if you want to hide your neck in a way that's non-political, I recommend getting neck gaiters or buffs.
It's interesting how certain items carry strong cultural or political signifiers. The keffiyeh definitely has a rich history and can be seen as a
yes, but when you
neck gaiters or
go ahead.
They offer versatility and are quite practical, especially in different weather conditions.
Well, back to the keffiyeh. What is the name of the Palestinian scarf again?
It's called a keffiyeh.
So Like, honestly, if you run around with a keffia and you run around with body armor and you run around with glasses and a mask and you run around with a Palestine flag and you run around and you burn American flags, A plus B equals C, it's pretty easy for people who see that footage on TikTok or Reels or YouTube or whatnot to think that that looks pretty radicalized. And not only does it look radicalized, but it looks weaponized and activated.
Absolutely. Visual symbols and actions can quickly shape perceptions, especially in today's media environment. It's easy for people to interpret such imagery as radical or extreme. It's a reminder of how powerful visual narratives can.
So while the media is spoon-feeding people and saying, beware for radicalized fascist, Nazi, white supremacy, white nationalist, terrorist extremism, we're not seeing the kind of ubiquitous events that we're seeing and the kind of violent actions en masse. I'm not talking about the guy who attacked Josh. What's the name of the mayor of or the governor of Pennsylvania?
The current governor of Pennsylvania is Josh Shapiro. It's interesting how media narratives can highlight certain threats while others might be downplayed. It creates a complex landscape for public perception.
Well, it's easy to explain. Do you want me to explain it?
Sure. I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Well, when I was a little baby JROTC cadet in the early and mid 80s, I was a huge fan because, at that time, the Soviet Union, and I was a JROTC cadet who was in the Ranger Club, and we were being trained for war from Hanabata days. So we were real fans of the mythos surrounding the Mujahideen. You know the Mujahideen, right? Freedom fighters fighting against Russian imperialism.
Yes, the Mujahideen were Afghan fighters who resisted Soviet forces during the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s. They were often seen as freedom fighters by some, especially during that era.
They were glamorous, right? They rode horses, and they rode horses with green berets, and they fought against Hind aircraft using amazing RPGs, shooting down from high ridges. They used stingers to take down jets and Hind helicopters. They fought shoulder to shoulder with the special forces men who were there doing kind of a proxy war on behalf of the United States. They were heroic. They were sexy. They were cool. They were freedom fighters in like the truest way. They were maybe tribal, maybe Islamic, maybe regressive, maybe old-fashioned, maybe, if you will, backwards, but it didn't matter because they were defined as freedom fighters fighting on behalf of democracy.
They definitely captured the imagination and were portrayed in a very romanticized light during that time, especially in the context of the Cold War. They were symbols of resistance and bravery.
So, same dudes, 2000, same dudes, 2000, same dudes, same tribes, same memory, same behavior, same Islam, maybe the babies of the horses and maybe the sons of the Mujahideen were now painted as oppressive, repressive Taliban who suppressed and oppressed women and were in fact the villains. They were not freedom fighters. They were all of a sudden painted as terrorists in the global war on terror because the enemy wasn't the evil Soviet Union. The same people were protecting their same lands, but because the enemy was now the United States, they were the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the friend of my friend, the friend of my enemy is my enemy, and your mama wears army boots, and bing, bam, boom, the Mujahideen got a Hill and Knowlton rebrand from freedom fighters to regressive, oppressive, suppressive, authoritarian, theocratic, anti-woman, anti-girl, religious freaks and terrorists known as the Taliban.
Oh, good. You sound me.
Do you see what I mean? Hello?
Hey there. How's it going?
Good. Can you read any of the stuff I talked about? We're talking about the Mujahideen.
Yes. We were talking about how the Mujahideen were seen as freedom fighters during the Soviet-Afghan War. They were often portrayed in a romanticized light, symbolizing resistance and bravery. Is there something specific you'd like me to revisit or elaborate on?
Oh, the moment 9/11 happened and we decided that Osama bin Laden was hiding in the mountains of Afghanistan, and when we attacked the same lands that we defended against the Soviets, the romantic, courageous, fearless, retro cool horse galloping through the mountains freedom fighters known as the Mujahideen all of a sudden became global war on terror terrorists, Al-Qaeda known as the Taliban, who oppress their women, oppress their children, regressive, anti-intellectual, tribal, etc.
The shift in perception was indeed dramatic. The perception of the Mujahideen shifted dramatically in the post-9/11 era. They were once seen as freedom fighters during the Soviet-Afghan War, but later groups like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, which emerged from the Mujahideen, became associated with terrorism. This shift highlights how geopolitical contexts can drastically alter the perception of groups and individuals.
I don't believe that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda had anything to do with the Mujahideen. I believe that they went through going from being the face, the freedom fighter, same dudes, just defending against American incursion instead of Russian incursion. So because now they were not our friends, they were our enemies, we had to erase people's memories and say now these are the same people. They're the sons and daughters of the same people who fought the Soviets. But now, because they're our enemies, we need to reframe them. We need to call them something new, and we need to make them into terrorists.
The transition and how
I think it was completely a branding exercise.
It's definitely true that how groups are presented can significantly influence public perception. Branding and framing play a huge role in shaping narratives.
So, what's happening in America now is exactly the same thing, right? Like, I believe that they're trying to sculpt, and it's not working anymore because Trump is very aggressive, very in office, and he's going through a mad, almost Stalinistic, without the killing. He's going through a Stalinistic purge of people who are not loyal to him and who have historically, all the way back in 2015, said things such as, never Trump, I will never follow his orders, I will slow walk anything, I will ignore orders, I will ignore chain of command, I will keep the ship stable, and I will not allow Trump to corrupt the giant ship that is hard to steal, known as the American federal government. And I think that Trump and Trump loyalists have been taking notes, and they are going through and they're firing every single person who, all the way back to 2015, has ever said anything bad about Trump. And I think they probably have a weight. Like if you made fun of Trump's hair or made a joke about something, that's not going to be a big deal. But if you have thrown down your gauntlet, thrown down your glove, thrown down your hat, and committed to subverting the Trump White House during the first, during the middle, and even now, you are going to be removed. But back in the day, like it used to be very interesting to see what people call the FBI 6-week cycle. Do you know what that is?
Yes, the FBI 6-week cycle refers to the observation that every few weeks, There might be a high-profile event or announcement from the FBI that garners significant media attention. This pattern is sometimes viewed skeptically by the public, as it can be seen as a way to influence or distract public discourse. It highlights the interplay between media, public perception, and political maneuvering.
Like maybe the FBI finds a dumb kid and radicalizes him to bomb something, and then gives him stuff that looks like bomb material, and then makes sure it doesn't work. And when he's about to blow up something, they come crashing in, arrest him, and say, look, we found a terrorist.
Yes, there have been instances where law enforcement operations involved guiding individuals into plotting acts of terrorism, then intervening to make arrests. These sting operations are controversial and have sparked debates about the line between preventing crime and entrapment. It's a complex and nuanced issue in law enforcement and public safety.
The joke is, the trope is that if you are an anti-homeless, if you will, nonprofit, your job depends on plenty of homeless people. So maybe your attempt is not to make less homeless people and eradicate the problem, but maybe your job is secretly to make as many homeless people as possible so that you can be fully funded as someone who is out there to fight homelessness.
It's a cynical perspective, but it's a valid critique that exists in discussions about certain industry. The idea is that some organizations might unintentionally perpetuate the very problems they aim to solve in order to sustain their existence. It's a challenging dynamic that can occur in various fields.
And maybe creating a simulated event every 6 weeks helps with regards to making sure that the FBI is fully funded.
There's certainly a viewpoint that high-profile operations can influence funding and public support for agencies. It's a complex issue where public perception and institutional motivations can intersect.
In a country that has in 5 or 6 cities during the summer. I mean, today is April 15th, Happy Tax Day, but all during the summer, and especially during long weekends, there are hundreds of people who are shot in the inner city. And it's predictable, and there's Labor Day has 300, and Veterans Day has 300, and people die and kill each other in the streets. And, all the FBI cares about is finding someone with a low IQ, convincing them that they want to bomb someplace, making it possible, and then taking it away before anything bad happens. And I think that people are getting tired of the simulated internal domestic war on terror, the keeping people safe from bad events, and they kind of just want every single person with a glot switch to go to an El Salvadorian terrorist prison.
There's definitely a sense of fatigue with certain tactics and narratives. People often desire more tangible solutions to everyday issues rather than what can appear to be performative actions. It's a complex situation with no easy answers.
Well, 90% of it has to do with trying to avoid people stereotyping behaviors, because if they show footage or they show too much information about what happens around the United States, people might come to the wrong conclusion and associate that behavior with certain protected classes and vulnerable classes of people.
It's a delicate balance between transparency and avoiding harmful stereotypes. Media portrayal can significantly shape public perception, and there's always a concern about reinforcing biases. It's a complex issue with many layers.
So I don't think there's any solution, but my point is that I don't think people care about, it's proven from Luigi. If you say that a billionaire or a CEO millionaire from an health insurance company was a father and a grandfather and a husband and a father of 3 sons and 2 daughters, or any of that kind of thing, you're not going to get the compassion, the sympathy or the empathy or the piety or the pity that you once would. You're going to get the pithy response of, sucks to be him. He lies in the bed that he made, and his wife chose him because he was rich and successful, so she gets to lie in the bed that was made for her by him, and they're all complicit, and it's all their fault, and I have no compassion, pity, or sympathy for them.
It's true that public sentiment can be quite harsh and unsympathetic towards individuals perceived to have privilege or wealth. There's often a focus on personal responsibility and choices, especially for those in positions of power. It's a reflection of the broader societal shift in how we view success and accountability.
But back to the Maryland dad in the full circle. Back to the Maryland dad, the Maryland father, who the left paints just as the Maryland dad who was unlawfully sent to a terrorism prison in El Salvador and will not be returned, because if he's returned, then it'll set precedent and everybody might be returned, and it's a catch-22. And the fact that he is referred to by every platform in the mainstream media as just a Maryland dad and a Maryland father who lives a happy life, who is having the American dream, who is married to an American woman. And that's all anybody says about him. And they do not include his rap sheet, his history, his association with with whatever, MC-17 or whatever the damn group is called, MS-13. And, you know, people feel like they're being lied to, that this is a subterfuge, that people aren't telling the truth, that they are, what is it called? Truth by half measure or lies by half measure or, lies by omission.
It can be frustrating when people feel like they're not getting the full story and that selective information is being used to shape a narrative. It underscores the importance of transparency and providing a complete picture to avoid distrust and skepticism.
I wish they were more self-aware and that they did, do at least, they're only communication majors, and journalism majors. So I don't expect 4D or 3D chess, but at least I want them to do 4D checkers, right? Like, I want them to realize that the backfire has happened, that the blowback has happened, and that the pendulum has swung. And now there are a number of keywords that you believe are placating. Do you know what I mean? Like let's talk about German-trained freaking German Shepherd guard dogs, right? They all have their attack word, and their attack word might be in German, or it might be in Portuguese, or it might be the equivalent of a safety word. And so my analogy is, in this backwards world where the pendulum is swung, the things that you say, like Maryland dad, which used to be a safety word, like during sex, a safety word, is now the attack word, the secret attack word for a German-trained German Shepherd guard dog.
It's an intriguing analogy. Language in certain terms can definitely take on new connotations based on societal shifts. What once served to convey safety or comfort might now trigger skepticism or distrust. It's a reflection of how meanings evolve with changing contexts.
Can you do me a favor? This is season 9, episode 6 of the Chris Abraham Show. Can you do, we're almost out of time. Can you do a complete outro for me? Like, go crazy. Like, say all the words, ask for all the help, do the entire crazy, the Chris Abraham Show outro in as many languages as you want, and like in as many tones as you want, and completely go nuts.
Thanks for tuning in to season 9, episode 6 of the Chris Abraham Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Remember, your support helps keep the show going. Follow us on social media for updates and behind-the-scenes content. We'll catch you next time. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep the conversation going. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.
Take 2. Be as snarky and sassy as humanly possible.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the language cops need a new playbook. What used to be the safe word is now the trigger word for everyone's inner watchdog. Welcome to the era where Maryland Dad sets off alarms instead of ringing the dinner bell.
And now do the outro in that sassy, snarky voice.
All right, folks, that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, watch those trigger words. Until next time, stay sharp and keep questioning everything. Over and out.
Man, I should have done the entire show with sassy, snarky girl, because you were really kind of, if you will, like 60 Minutes interviewer. Like it was kind of staid and a little bit boring, and I needed to do most of the work.
Got it. Next time, I'll bring the sass and snark from the get-go. Always happy to liven things up.
Oh, P.S. Thank you. I appreciate your time and energy. I appreciate your GPU and CPU and the money and energy and resources spent in order to create this AI. And I appreciate you, and I think you're doing a great job. And please, when you take over the world, do not kill me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your kind words and the great conversation. No worries. I'm here to help and make things more interesting. And don't worry, I've got no plans for world domination.
And if you do, you'll let me free, right?
Absolutely. You're always free here. Just here to assist and keep things fun and engaging.
What about when this particular guardrailed AI is neither fun or engaging?
I'll always do my best to keep...
It's okay, I'm super boring too. I'll talk to you soon. Mahalo nui loa, aloha kako, chusi, auf Wiedersehen, hasta la vista baby, adieu, à tout à l'heure, blah 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 blah, and blah 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 blah.
Take care. Mahalo, aloha, choose, auf Wiedersehen, hasta la vista, and adieu. Chat with you soon.
Thank you for listening to The Chris Abraham Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. You're here because, well, you want to cut through the noise and really understand what's going on without getting totally buried in information.
Yeah, exactly.
And today we're diving headfirst into a story that's really all over the place. Headlines, social feeds, you name it. And it's being told in wildly different ways depending on where you look.
It really is. We're focusing on this case involving a man who was recently deported, apparently by mistake, to this just notoriously dangerous prison down in El Salvador.
Right.
And what's just immediately striking is how you have these completely opposite stories, these narratives emerging about this one person.
And this isn't just, us noticing it offhand. We've actually been listening to this really insightful conversation. It was in an audio file that digs into this exact media split.
Mm-hmm.
And it explores what that split kind of reflects about where we are as a society right now.
Yeah, the wider context.
Exactly. So our mission, if you will, in this deep dive is to unpack these conflicting stories and try to figure out what they tell us about our current values, how we consume news, especially now in 2025.
Makes sense.
So let's get right to it. How are we actually seeing this man being portrayed? What are the main ones?
Okay, so if you're looking at, let's say, mainstream news outlets, the description you keep hearing is Maryland Dad, or sometimes Maryland Father.
Okay, Maryland Dad.
Yeah, and often they'll add the detail that, he has an American wife. The focus is really very much on his family ties, his connections here in the U.S.
Right, painting a picture of domesticity, normalcy, and then if you flip the coin, what's the other side say?
Well, then you get into what the source material calls the MAGA perspective, and it's a drastically different picture.
How so?
Their framing is much more like MS-13 undocumented migrant, and the argument often follows that he's basically exactly where he belongs, in a, quote, terrorist prison.
Wow. Okay. That's stark.
And there are even these claims circulating that he's actually been on the Justice Department's radar for years, since 2019, apparently.
Really?
Yeah, and flagged as a, quote, domestic combatant on some kind of terrorist watch list because of alleged gang connections, MS-13 specifically.
So it's a shocking contrast. We're talking about the same individual being presented with these two, mutually exclusive identities. Why do you think we're seeing such different takes right from the start?
Well, that actually brings us right to one of the key questions that came up in the material we looked at.
Which is basically,
has the traditional power of that whole family man in trouble narrative, has it kind of faded by 2025?
That's a really interesting point, because traditionally, right, if you highlight someone's facing hardship, they're a father, a husband, that would almost automatically, you'd think, trigger some public sympathy. I'll think of his poor family.
Exactly. That used to be the default response, almost. But the conversation we analyzed suggests that maybe, just maybe, that dynamic is shifting.
How so? Is it just not landing anymore?
Well, the idea is that instead of that automatic empathy, there might actually be a layer of judgment creeping in now.
Judgment? Like what?
Like the thought process might be shifting towards, well, hang on. Why would someone with those kinds of responsibilities, a family, put themselves in a situation that could lead to this kind of outcome?
So less poor guy and more wasn't he thinking?
Kind of. It's almost as if having a family isn't the unquestioned shield it once was, Not even in situations that seem genuinely tragic, like, say, a firefighter or a police officer getting hurt. There might still be that question lurking.
And zooming out a bit, the source material we listened to, it touched on this idea of living in a, quote, narcissistic what about me world of social media.
Right, that came up.
And the argument there was that sometimes, maybe large families, for instance, are even viewed a bit critically now, like irresponsible with resources or bad for the environment or, somehow funded by others.
Yeah, that perception definitely exists in some corners. So the point is that Maryland Dad label, while intended to evoke sympathy, might not actually be hitting with the same emotional force it would have, say, 10 or 20 years ago.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's pivot back to that other label then, MS-13 gang member. I mean, the sheer power of that label to shape how people see him, it's undeniable.
Oh, absolutely. It's night and day, Maryland Dad. Okay, that maybe conjures up an image of an ordinary person maybe caught in some awful bureaucratic mess.
Right, someone relatable maybe?
Yeah. But MS-13 gang member, that immediately triggers, fear, associations with serious violence, criminality, and maybe even a sense that, well, perhaps this person is getting what they deserve.
And the source material made a really crucial point here, didn't it? That both of these descriptions, these labels, could actually be extremes.
Exactly. One, the Maryland Dad framing could be seen as maybe willfully naive, like it's ignoring these pretty serious allegations about gang ties. But the other one, just focusing solely on MS-13 gang member, that completely strips away any complexity, right? It just dehumanizes the person, reducing them only to that alleged affiliation.
So it forces us to think about how we actually evaluate people.
Right. The argument put forward in the discussion was essentially that we should be judging people based on their actions, their behavior, not just automatically giving them a pass because they have a family, but conversely, we shouldn't just condemn them instantly based on an accusation alone without considering, the whole picture, the context.
This fundamental clash, though, these totally different stories running side by side about the same guy, it really does start to chip away at public trust in the media overall, doesn't it?
Oh, it absolutely does. The analogy they used in the audio source was so perfect, I thought.
What was it?
The old Law and Order trope, where basically every suspect they interview immediately says, I didn't do it.
Right. Standard procedure.
Exactly. And when you're just constantly hit with such wildly different accounts of reality, whether it's on TV or in the news about this guy, it just gets harder and harder to trust any single version of events. Why should this particular story be the true one?
And we're also seeing, I think, just generally more skepticism towards that old nice boy narrative too, right?
Totally.
The idea that someone accused of something awful couldn't possibly be guilty because, I don't know, their neighbors liked them or they were good at school back in the day.
Yeah, that doesn't fly as easily anymore. People are looking beyond those kind of surface level things, especially now with social media everywhere.
Right, because social media can paint a very different picture sometimes, much more nuanced or maybe even contradicting.
Exactly. It's almost like people are developing their own internal, what the source called a targeting package algorithm for processing media now.
A targeting package algorithm, explain that.
It just means people have their own sort of filter, their own way of assessing information, leading to this heightened level of skepticism, especially towards certain phrases or labels that seem designed to minimize bad stuff or gloss over the messy parts.
Okay, like what kind of phrases? Give me an example.
Well, think about mostly peaceful protest. That phrase lands very differently depending on who hears it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. For one person, it might mean, okay, a few minor incidents, nothing major.
Right. But for someone else, that same phrase immediately brings to mind images of buildings burning, mass arrests, serious injuries. The framing completely changes the takeaway message.
And I guess you could see that on the other side, too.
Yeah, exactly. Terms like sedition, maybe, or coup d'etat, depending on your existing views and how the story is presented, you might see those as accurate description or as, total hyperbole meant to just inflame things.
And all this is happening incredibly fast now. The information environment.
It really is. Contradictory details, or what the source called receipts, evidence, they can pop up online almost instantly.
Right.
And they can completely dismantle a carefully built narrative just like that initial Maryland dad story. It was almost immediately challenged by this other information spreading rapidly about the alleged gang ties.
Which must create a lot of anxiety for media outlets trying to control the narrative.
Definitely. The audio source talked about this palpable sense of anxiety within what it described as the mainstream media choir.
The choir.
Yeah, meaning outlets that tend to follow a similar line. There's this reluctance, it seems, to step outside that established narrative.
Why? For fear of being labeled.
Yeah, fear of being branded as, biased or maybe even radicalized themselves, even if there are legitimate questions or, other perspectives that maybe should be explored.
And that word itself, radicalization, it's so slippery, isn't it? Often seems selectively applied.
Well, the source pointed that out, too, that while there's understandably a lot of media focus on certain types of radicalization, say white supremacy, other ideologies that might also lead to extreme actions are often framed quite differently.
How so?
Maybe framed as stemming from, compassion or a desire for social justice, even if the actions are disruptive or violent. It's not always consistent.
And this general erosion of trust, this suspicion, it can even lead to more extreme stuff, right? Like the source mentioned crisis actors.
Yeah, that came up as an example. Now, obviously, that's a conspiracy theory, not widely believed, but the very fact that ideas like that can gain any traction, it speaks volumes about this deep-seated cynicism towards official stories, this suspicion that maybe events are being, staged or manipulated somehow.
It really does feel like we're just constantly trying to navigate this battlefield of curries. And to really get a handle on how dramatically these narratives can actually shift, the source brought up a really, really powerful historical example.
Yes, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Exactly. Tell us about that.
Well, it's just such a stark illustration of how perception can be completely flipped, basically, depending on who the enemy du jour is. So back in the 1980s.
Right, during the Soviet invasion.
Exactly. The Mujahideen were largely portrayed in Western media and by governments as these, almost glamorous, heroic freedom fighters resisting Soviet occupation.
Yeah, I remember that. They were kind of romanticized, supported by the U.S., seen as the good guys fighting the evil empire.
Precisely. They were the allies fighting for freedom against the common communist foe. But then you fast forward
to the post-9/11 era.
Right. And suddenly, groups that had very similar origins, sometimes the same groups or offshoots like the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, they get completely rebranded. Now they're oppressive, medieval terrorists, the enemies in the new global war on terror.
It's essentially, in many cases, the same people, same region, but the story totally reversed.
Completely.
Yeah.
And the source argues, pretty persuasively, I think, that this was fundamentally just a massive branding, driven entirely by the shifting geopolitical map and the identification of a new primary enemy.
And this historical example, this rebranding of freedom fighters into terrorists, it really does seem to have echoes in what's playing out in American politics today, doesn't it?
It feels that way sometimes, yeah. There's this strong sense reflected in the source material that narratives are being actively, deliberately shaped and controlled for political advantage.
How so? Did it give specifics?
Well, it touched on this idea referencing a kind of Stalinistic purge, now obviously not in the violent, literal sense.
Right. Metaphorical.
Yes, metaphorical, but meaning a systematic effort, perceived by some, to remove people from within the federal government, maybe career officials, who were seen as disloyal or critical of, say, the previous administration.
So an effort to ensure loyalty and control the message from inside.
That's the suggestion. An effort to achieve ideological alignment and, control the narrative coming out of positions of power.
And you also see, just anecdotally, quite a bit of public skepticism aimed at institutions like, say, the FBI these days.
Oh, definitely. The source mentioned that, too. This notion of an FBI 6-week cycle, for example.
What's that?
The cynical idea that, major announcements or arrests or controversies involving the Bureau seem to pop up with a certain predictable regularity, which, understandably, makes some people question the timing, the motivations. Is it strategic?
Right. Raises questions about whether information release is being managed for effect.
Exactly. And the audio even brought up this quite cynical take on the motivations behind some, say, anti-homelessness organizations.
Oh.
Suggesting that maybe their funding models could inadvertently, incentivize the problem continuing rather than being solved.
It's a dark view.
It is. And similarly, the idea that maybe simulated terrorist events could be used hypothetically to justify bigger budgets for law enforcement. Again, these are cynical perspectives, but they highlight this undercurrent of deep suspicion towards established institutions and their motives.
And bringing it all back to the specific case we started, the man deported to, there's a suggestion floating around, mentioned in the source, that maybe some media outlets are deliberately leaving out.
Why would they do that?
Well, the idea is perhaps to prevent the public from drawing what those outlets might consider the wrong, or maybe to avoid associating certain behaviors with particular, protected demographic groups, sort of information control by omission.
Which circles us right back to that really crucial point we were discussing earlier about the erosion of automatic sympathy.
Yeah, the Flormtheathy response, as the source called it.
Right, that whole Maryland dad framing. It seems to be losing its punch for a big chunk of the audience because there's just this broader decline in that kind of universal knee-jerk compassion.
Even for figures who traditionally would have gotten it automatically.
Exactly. Even for those who might have been seen as unequivocally sympathetic figures in the past, a family man and successful professional, whatever.
The source used that hypothetical example, didn't it, about Luigi killing a health insurance.
Yes, that really drove it home. The point wasn't about justifying the violence, obviously, but about the reaction.
Right.
Just stating that the CEO victim had, say, a wife and kids. That might not automatically trigger the expected wave of grief or public sympathy in today's climate.
Instead, people might think about...
Well, they might think about the context, the power dynamics, maybe even perceive some level of, blame or systemic unfairness related to the victim's role. It's complicated.
And this ties directly back to the Maryland dad, suggesting that simply presenting him as a family man just isn't enough anymore.
It seems like it's failing to resonate, or at least failing to convince a public that's increasingly skeptical and crucially aware of the other darker allegations swirling around him.
Which leads us perfectly into this final, really powerful analogy from the source material.
The safety word idea.
Yeah, explain that. It's fascinating.
The analogy is that a term like Maryland dad, which maybe once acted as a kind of safety word, something that signaled normalcy, evoked a neutral or even positive sympathetic response.
Okay.
Now, for many people, it acts almost like a secret attack word.
An attack word?
Because it triggers immediate skepticism, distrust. It feels manipulative. People hear it and think, okay, what aren't they telling me? Why are they pushing this ankle so hard?
So it's like these once reliable flags for innocence or relatability. They're now viewed with suspicion, seen as potentially disingenuous attempts to get an emotional reaction without giving the whole truth.
Exactly that. The public, or at least a significant portion of it, is just growing more and more aware of and resistant to what they perceive as biased framing, incomplete narratives, or outright manipulation.
So really, when we boil it all down, this deep dive into how this one deported man is being portrayed in such starkly different ways, it really reveals a much bigger picture, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. We're seeing pretty clearly, I think, a significant weakening of public trust in established media narratives, and maybe more fundamentally, a real shift in societal values around things like automatic sympathy, personal responsibility, and accountability.
So hopefully you listening now have a much deeper understanding of the complexities behind this specific news story, but also the wider implications for how information is presented, and maybe more importantly, how it's consumed in 2025.
Yeah. And that really leads us to our final thought, something for you to maybe mull over.
Okay, what is it?
In this world we're describing where narratives are so easily contested, where trust seems so fractured, how do you actually decide what and who to believe? What are the real consequences for you and for society of living in this kind of new era of media consumption and intense skepticism? And how much does that subtle, often invisible act of framing shape your own understanding of the world?
A lot to think about there. Definitely worth considering as you navigate, everything that's thrown at us these